It's great to have conversations like this with colleagues like you across the world, because this is how we improve the situation. Because I think for so many women, particularly those with persistent pelvic pain, they feel so alone and so isolated and oftentimes gaslit about the validity of what they're feeling, particularly when imaging doesn't always match symptoms. And I really think that even if one person out there, hears this and thinks, oh, that's me, that's what I have going on, and they leave with some tools to take away or to have a different conversation with their healthcare provider, then I think we're moving in the right direction.
I'm Alicia, I'm a GP. This is my lovely co-host, Cherie, an exercise physiologist with a deep interest in a topic that we're going to be discussing. We're going to be talking about the vagus nerve, but before we do, please, Michelle, could you tell us a little bit about you and also about Libra? Did she pronounce that right?
So close. So very, very close. Yeah, so my name is Michelle Lyons and I'm a physio and I live here in Ireland, but I spend a lot of time gallivanting around the place because I spend most of my time translating evidence into clinical practice and teaching postgrad courses and presenting at conferences and things like that. And my website is Celebrate Muliebrity, because muliebrity is an old English word and it means the art and state of being a woman. And of course, I think that should be celebrated. So my passion, it's women's health has really been my passion. I've qualified over 30 years ago. So I'm very, very nerdy about all things women's health, but I have a particular interest in pelvic pain and bowel and bladder and sexual health, and just, what we can do to help women live well, because I think for a long time, women's health has been very, very underserved and dismissed. And I think, the revolution is here and I am for it. And it's great to have conversations like this with colleagues like you across the world, because this is how we improve the situation. Because I think for so many women, particularly those with persistent pelvic pain, they feel so alone and so isolated and oftentimes gaslit about the validity of what they're feeling, particularly when imaging doesn't always match symptoms. And I really think that we can do better by women, and that's why I love having these conversations, because I think we can really, even if one person out there, hears this and thinks, oh, that's me, that's what I have going on, and they leave with some tools to take away or to have a different conversation with their healthcare provider, then I think we're moving in the right direction.
You're giving me goosebumps already, Michelle. So I'm so excited for this conversation. I've been really excited to talk to you about the vagus nerve. And in my practice, where I see lots and lots of people with persistent pelvic pain, of all genders, I would say, but predominantly women, what I've distilled my approach down to is 4 things. So it is thinking about someone's periods and cycles, their bowels, their pelvic floor, and their nervous system. And to me, if I can manage or work with someone to manage those 4 things really well, I'm like 80% of the way there for most people to get their persistent pelvic pain much better. And so what I was really hoping we could drill down on a little bit today was that 4th thing that I mentioned, which is the nervous system, and in particular, the role of the vagus nerve. Kind of starting by perhaps sharing a little bit about your thoughts on the nervous system in pelvic pain.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the nervous system, we have one brain, and she has to deal with both physical and psychological pain, and she has to keep all the systems running. Of course. So she's running the whole show, basically. And she's got minions, in the central nervous system, but also in the peripheral nervous system. And what we have to, I think, remember is that if mission control isn't happy, then nothing else in the system is going to be happy either. So the brain and the central nervous system are dealing with messages coming in from the periphery and then sending out responses as to how to respond to those. And a lot of that will be based on not only what's happening at a physiological level in terms of inflammation and infection, let's say, but also environmental factors and stressors and how we're living our lives day to day in the world. So the vagus nerve it's become very, very popular, and there's a lot of mythology that is built up around the vagus nerve as well. And then we have an offshoot of that called polyvagal theory as well, which kind of dovetails in with what we know about the vagus nerve. But the vagus is a very real physical structure. It's one of the cranial nerves. It's our 10th cranial nerve. And the name vagus actually comes from the Latin vagare, which means to wander. So it's known as the wandering nerve because it's coming out from the brainstem. It's coming down the sides of our neck. It's sending branches to the larynx and the pharynx, and traveling down through the chest, going to the heart and the lungs, and then going further south of the diaphragm, sending branches to the kidneys, the stomach, the digestive system, down as far as the colon. And there are even some studies looking at branches to the female reproductive system as well. And 80% of the vagus is involved in bringing messages from the outside in. Through these afferent fibers coming back up to the brain, and then we've got 20% of the vagus bringing messages back down from the queen to tell us what to do with that. So the vagus nerve is really, I suppose, the integral part of our parasympathetic nervous system, which we think about, in that rest and digest and calming and regulating and keeping an eye on what's going on and giving us some resilience to deal with life. But it's got a huge role to play in the autonomic functions of our organs, our gut, our bladder, our uterus, our reproductive system. And it's very responsive to stress. It's very responsive to inflammation. It's very responsive to gastrointestinal upset, because it really is, it's the central foundation of our gut-brain axis, which is going to influence not only mood, but our immune regulation. And particularly when we're thinking and talking about issues like endometriosis, which we're now starting to recognize as a whole person, immune, autoimmune, possibly upregulated disorder. And it's a whole body problem that we have to acknowledge, instead of just looking, maybe as we did in the past, let's just do a hysterectomy and we'll take out the organs that we can't figure out what to do with. And honestly, I think the vagus is a great doorway into, regulating the nervous system, calming down those threatening messages that can really turn the volume up on distress, on pain. And I'm not saying that it replaces endometriosis treatment from a medical or surgical perspective, but it's certainly, I think, for many, the missing piece, particularly when they've been dealing with persistent pain for years. And they have the medication or the surgery, but their pain is still there because the nervous system doesn't realize that initial threat has been dealt with. And so everything is still, the nervous system is still up here. What can we do to bring it down into like a state of homeostasis again and give people back control over the quality of their lives?
You are absolutely speaking our language, Michelle. Like it's incredible to take this lens through it, because we often talk about the NEI ensemble, so the nervous system, the endocrine system, and the immune system ensemble. And like it's a complex issue, and you're right, and it hasn't had the attention that it's needed. And it is a whole body thing. We want to respect the whole body of what's happening.
Yeah.
But I find that it's such an easy, and please tell me what your philosophy is. It is that easy access, and if you can tell us a little bit about, what does that mean?
So I think my interest in all of this, anyone who knows me knows that I'm moderately obsessed with constipation, because I think constipation is the root of all evil.
Me too.
Yeah.
I think about it at night when I can't sleep.
I just think it can give us such an insight into how somebody is doing overall, in terms of their health and wellness, because it's our digestive system really is such a good reflection of what's happening from an immune perspective, from a hormonal perspective, particularly from a female hormonal perspective, because, we've got all those fluctuations during the menstrual cycle, and then, of course, in the perinatal transition and perimenopause. But I think from an endometriosis angle particularly, we know that endo and IBS are often misdiagnosed as each other. And, of course, they can coexist at the same time as well. And, we talk about things like endobelly as well, the bloating that people can get. And some of that, I think, could be due to, of course, digestive sensitivities. Some of it, I think, could actually be undiagnosed abdominophrenic dyssynergia. And then, we could throw in a little bit of, hypermobility or Ehlers-Danlos into the mix, and some mast cell upregulation and all of the things. Because I think endometriosis, again, if we hold on to that central notion of endo as a whole body immune inflammatory disorder, of course the digestive system is going to be affected. And for me, I mean, think back to the last time either, I'm sure you two never get constipated because you're on it, in terms of bowel health. But imagine a time where you have been constipated and how awful you feel with that. You feel heavy and stagnant, but like your brain is foggy and your mood is low because that gut-brain axis, I mean, I think we now know that we're about 90% microbes and 10% humans. So it's the microbes world, it's bacteria's world, and we're just living in it. We're just a host organism most of the time. So what we want to do is we want to keep the environment calm and productive. So we're taking in what we need, we're digesting the nutrients, and then we're getting rid of what we no longer need. But of course, that all goes sideways with endometriosis. And so then we start adding in stressors, upregulated immune systems. We've got cytokine production, the bladder's getting annoyed, we've got the bowel getting annoyed, we've got the pelvic floor, we've got the nervous system. And of course, then that's going to lead to brain fog. And then, we're also potentially dealing with iron deficiency because, of course, we get those lovely heavy periods with endo as well. And the whole thing can just feel super, super overwhelming.
And it's a shit show, Michelle.
Quite literally. Quite literally.
It is.
Yeah. Or indeed a no shit show sometimes. Talking about bowel health can be a less overwhelming way to start breaking that cycle for folks with endometriosis. And talking about because oftentimes it's the simplest strategies, things that we assume that everybody knows because it's what we talk about all day, every day. But not everybody is as obsessed, perhaps, as the three of us are with good bowel health. When our nervous system is upregulated as well, the pelvic floor muscles are so psychologically sensitive. If they're anticipating pain or danger or we are stressed out, they go into protective mode and they get super tight and overactive. And so that, of course, can further drive constipation, which, of course, just adds more fuel to the fire. So oftentimes it is literally just starting with some breath work to calm things down, first of all, and get people out of their heads a little bit and back into their body. And the way that we can start to break that cycle is actually tapping into the parasympathetic power, if you like, of the vagus nerve. So if we understand what's happening with the anatomical pathway of the vagus nerve, really coming from the top down, sometimes going straight into, talking about abdominal or pelvic issues, it's too confronting for somebody who's in that state of central sensitization and nervous system upregulated. So we might start even from the neck up and just talking about some breath work. We might talk about, just some gentle TMJ work. The ancient Roman
TMJ, just for someone who's not medical, is the jaw, which is often really sore. And if you at home or listening and you have pelvic pain, I bet you get headaches too, and I bet you're really sore if you're pressing there. But continue. Sorry, Michelle.
No, I was just going to say, the ancient Romans, when they would have their big feasts, they would actually massage around the back of their ear and the mastoid process, that bony part of their jaw, to stimulate digestion. So, we've known for a long time that there is this connection between, I suppose, the neck and the jaw and what's happening further south in our digestive system. And so this can be a really good non-threatening place to start. And I also like to tap into the fact that the vagus nerve is sending branches to the larynx and the pharynx as well, so your voice box, basically. And we know that humming can be a really effective way of increasing vagal tone, of just making the vagus nerve give it a little bit of space to do its work, basically. So taking a deep breath in and then on your exhale, just humming as you exhale. Yeah. And you can just kind of feel it goes throughout your body. There's been some research even showing that having like a purring cat sitting on your lap, can do wonders to regulate our nervous system. It's probably the same kind of loose connection there as well. But if we think about how we can increase vagal tone to make the vagus nerve work a little bit more efficiently and effectively for us, and that starts with understanding its anatomical pathway and then understanding how it works physiologically. But that's how we start to break the cycle. And breath work for me is just such a great way to start because it's both top down and bottom up, If we're talking about breath work from a top down perspective, we know that when we're stressed, our breathing gets really shallow and fast. And we know that when we're relaxed and we're chilled, breathing slows down. So if we can override our automatic breathing tendencies and start to do a little bit of breathing exercise, it's called resonant breathing, because we always have to put a label on it when we're doing research and reading articles. But resonant breathing, which is basically just inhaling for 5 and exhaling for 5. Super simple. We know that actually is going to start improving your vagal tone, your heart rate variability, calming the nervous system down. And then what we can start to do is we can start to coordinate the breath with the pelvic floor. And then we're starting to move a little bit further south, and we're creating a little bit more space for the digestive system to do its thing. And we're improving kind of, control over the outlet, so we can actually let out the things that no longer serve us and have these happy, healthy bowel movements that we aspire to. But actually, here's what's really interesting, because for many pelvic floor physios, what we do is we teach, so you inhale, you exhale, relax. You inhale, on your next exhale, you close and lift your pelvic floor. And that's traditionally how pelvic floor physios will teach people about activating their pelvic floor. But we actually have research showing that if you contract your pelvic floor as you inhale and then release it with the exhale, that improves your heart rate variability, literally lowers your blood pressure, and improves your vagal tone. So it can be a little bit counterintuitive sometimes, but something like that can be a great gateway towards calming the nervous system, tapping into the power of the vagus, creating a little bit more space for the bowel to eliminate what's no longer serving us, and just letting go of some of that tension that we're holding in the center of our body that can often be a significant amplifier of endometriosis pain. So we have tools at our disposal, simple things, as I said, breath work, moving the neck side to side, opening and closing your teeth, but keeping your mouth closed. So we're relaxing around the jaw, doing a little bit of massage down the sides of our neck. So we're not in any way near the danger zone, as some people might perceive us, but we're starting to kind of come in from the outside. Like if you're working with a skittish animal like a horse, you don't kind of go straight at them.
So, the breath is always accessible to you, so you can have it at any time and any moment.
Absolutely. I mean, like literally just over the past couple of days, I've been working on some submissions for the International Continence Society. And that's what we're looking at, kind of tapping into the nervous system and looking at lifestyle approaches to dealing with things like overactive bladder, and pelvic pain and things like that. Because I think we're complicated, we're beautifully designed, but we're complicated systems. But oftentimes, there's an old saying about, small hinges moving big doors. And sometimes we can go chasing complex,
that's one.
expensive, complicated solutions. Whereas, yes, absolutely, excision surgery can be great for some people managing on contraceptive pills. That's a great option for them. But we actually have good research out of Australia from Natasha Orr's team showing that for people who have that upregulated nervous system, who have some central sensitization where the nervous system has just become overly sensitive, it's like a baby monitor that's turned up way up too loud and you're picking up every little murmur as danger, then surgery won't work for those people. So we're now starting to see a trend, particularly in pelvic pain and endo research, that should we actually be screening folks as part of their prehab and their pre-op preparations for things like central sensitization and dealing with those changes before we have surgery or go down a medication path? Because ultimately, we all want better outcomes for people with endometriosis, but we're striving towards finding out, a better way all the time. And I think that lens is widening now from purely medical surgical to actually looking at the whole person attached to that pelvis. And if we don't address the nervous system, she won't be too happy, and people will wake up and they'll still, I thought this was going to be the answer, but I still have my pain. Because the nervous system doesn't realize that that the excision of the endometriosis, lesions has been done. It's still in a state of upregulation and threat. So again, it's taking, we love to talk about a biopsychosocial approach. And this for me is that, we have to look at the whole person.
Amazing. Michelle, I just wanted to backtrack a little bit, but just for someone who might not have a science background, I thought perhaps we might just come back to the nervous system in general.
Yeah.
And we've talked about this podcast a little bit, the idea of the autonomic nervous system being a bit like the automatic nervous system. It's the one that you're not consciously thinking about. And when I describe these things, I will say that I came to medical school from a non-science background as a graduate in my mid-20s, where I spent much of the first couple of years of medical school trying to work out what on earth everyone was talking about. And so it can be helpful just to kind of break things back down again. And so when we think about that automatic part of the nervous system, we've got, as you said, we've got the rest and digest part, which is so important. And we've got, which is the parasympathetic, and we've got the sympathetic, which is your fight, flight, freeze, fawn type. And it's almost like it's a seesaw. So you're either in one or the other. And so when we're talking about the vagus nerve, we're talking about that rest and digest part of the nervous system. And when you're talking about vagal tone, I'd love you to just explain a bit more. And is it sort of like the better your vagal tone, the more that seesaw side is up, the rest and digest, which means that the fight flight must come down? Is that what you mean?
It means that we can, to answer your question, I'm going to give you an analogy. There's a great book called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers by Robert Sapolsky. And in that book, he talks about how the zebras go down to the watering hole and maybe a crocodile jumps out of the water and the zebras are like, and they run away. And they're running and running and running, and they're away from the crocodile. And so the danger has passed, and then they come back down to the water and they're able to have another drink. And so what we're looking for when we talk about vagal tone and the autonomic nervous system and the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, and a lot of that can get really bogged down and murky. We're living our lives. A stressor pops up. We respond to the stressor appropriately, and then we might have some physical activity to burn off some of that stress reaction, and then we go back to living our life again. If our nervous system is very upregulated, if we stay too much in that sympathetic fight or flight, then our entire system of systems can become stressed out. And so we start to get, upsets in our GI system. Like everybody has a stress reaction in their bowel. For some folks, it's going to be constipation. For some, it's going to be diarrhea. But everybody, the bowel is such a good stress barometer. And what we want to do is, but when we talk about vagal toning, is it's to give you that resilience that you can see a stressor, you can respond to it appropriately, and then you come back down to baseline where you're chilled and you're safe and you're social and you're living your life. And you're not constantly waiting for the next threat or danger to come along with kind of your shoulders tensed and you're clenched and your teeth, gripping and your pelvic floor up around your tonsils. So it's all about kind of that resilience that, you can go into a stress response, but you can come back out of it again, instead of living your life there in that, because eventually, and that's kind of the premise of polyvagal theory, which is kind of based loosely, and it is a theory, just to put that out there. But it talks about how we've got, we want to ideally live our lives in this ventral vagal state. And that is where we feel safe. We feel connected to people. We're social. We're just, we're happy. We're doing things. We're not afraid all the time. We start to get more and more responsive to stressors and to threats. And so we go into sympathetic mode, which is that fight or flight. And so we're jangly all the time. We're hyper responsive and we're always looking for the next catastrophe. And if that persists, then we move into a dorsal vagal state, which is where we just withdraw and we shut down. And what we want to do is we want to be able to move back towards that ventral vagal space, where we're living our lives. We've got a baseline of calm. Yeah, we can respond to a danger, but we're coming back to calm again. And it's to have that, we talk about that in scientific terms, like heart rate variability, where we can have just that flexibility to respond, but then come back. And so we don't get stuck in that sympathetic fight or flight space. And so that's where we talk about toning the vagus. And again, like just giving it what it needs in terms of reassurance that we are safe. And as clinicians, what we can do then is, so we can amplify that by giving people choice about what they're going to do in terms of their treatment. We give them the context. Here's why I think this would be useful for you. What do you think? And then we provide connection as well. We're a safe place. We're coming from a position of competence. The patient kind of gets that we know what we're talking about. We have like a depth of knowledge here, but we're working with you. So it's more almost like a coaching relationship rather than a finger wagging, this is what you have to do. So I think by providing kind of choice and context and connection, we're using our nervous system almost to help regulate their nervous system. In the same way that we would with a small child or an animal, we set the tone, and that in itself can start to tone the vagus. And then we give them other tools as well. We can do this or we can do this. What would you like to do? And that in itself, I think, is very empowering for people and can really start to put them back in the driver's seat of their own lives again. Because I think, again, particularly from an endometriosis perspective, and we've all seen the stats that it takes, 8 to 12 years to get a diagnosis. And then people get the diagnosis and think, this is it. This is great. Now I can get a solution. It's like, no, now the journey is only beginning, and to start, you can feel very passive and very disempowered, and to start giving people back some choices over their own pathway. So I like to give people a buffet of choices. And what would you like to work on first? And that's where we're going to go, and I think that in itself is going to improve vagal tone, as well as anything else we might add into the mix.
Do you have, Michelle, then, just if we're thinking about a buffet, or we talked about fruit salad here, we talk about an and, not an or, we talk about soup. With the soup discussion did get a bit weird, but yeah, if you were to offer someone a few different tools that might help with their vagus, and if we think about, okay, so the vagus starts in the base of the brain and it wanders its way down through the jaw, through the throat, through the chest, diaphragm, tummy, all the way down. Mm-hmm. What are your kind of favourite buffet items that you might talk someone through? Because that's stuff people can do at home now.
Yeah.
And you don't need it. And we've talked about in other episodes, there's no chanting monks required. Like there's no sort of Italian hill science needed.
No. I mean, sometimes I always start with breath work. And the humming we mentioned already. Honestly,
I just want to stand up and cheer to you saying that. I just feel like we don't get enough exposure to just how incredible this is. So, I just want to cheer this episode on. I mean, the other stuff is really important. I'm not downplaying medical and all the other things that we talked about, like the investigations, all the other things. But I think that sometimes the technical stuff and the kind of more black and white stuff can sometimes dilute the message. And I think that every single tool and every single part of this buffet is just as important as the other.
Honestly, I ask the person in front of me what their goals are, first of all. Why are you coming to see me? How can I help? So it could be sexual dysfunction. It could be just getting through their work day. We know, for example, that with endometriosis, we talk about the evil triplets of pelvic pain being interstitial cystitis or bladder pain syndrome, and pudendal neuralgia. So I want to figure out what's impacting their day-to-day life the most. Where would you like to start? What are your biggest problems? And let's start there and work our way back. So it could be, some non-threatening movement patterning, because we know that yoga can be really effective for the vagus, because again, there's a lot of twisting, there's a lot of breath work, there's a lot of tuning into the body again. We might just even talk about just the power of kind of refreshing your sensory homunculus, almost splashing cold water on your face, has been shown to improve the vagus. We talked about the breath and the pelvic floor, pelvic floor down training, getting a little bit more awareness and control of that part of the body. Making sure that we've got all the basics covered, though, in terms of sleep, movement, nutrition, and what are you doing for stress management. And then an often overlooked tool, I think, that is just kind of starting to come back into vogue again is the humble TENS machine. And the TENS machine has been shown to be super effective in terms of managing both menstrual and endometriosis pain when we apply it either kind of, in the abdominal region or in the lower back. But we actually also have research showing that when we apply the TENS machine to the lower inner leg to stimulate the tibial nerve, we know that it's great for bladder and bowel frequency urgency, but also we can improve the autonomic functioning of the nervous system of those, abdominal pelvic organs as well. So we can tap into that power. The tibial nerve and neuromodulation with a TENS machine, it's cheap, it's cheerful, it's effective, and it works. And I think sometimes, and because as well, the other benefit of doing a tibial nerve stimulation is you're going to get the bowel and the bladder benefits as well, obviously, as the pain management. But because it's on the lower inner leg, it's away from the danger zone. And you get to do it for yourself. It's something that, your clinician can set you up with, but then you take your TENS machine home and, your clinician will have showed you how to use it. And then it's something that you're taking control of and you're doing for yourself. And I think things like that can really, again, just start to move that needle back towards more of that parasympathetic state that we're looking at. I mean, we have to get those basic building blocks in place, like, what you're eating. We know like there's evidence about, a Mediterranean style, whole food, primarily plant-based diet works really well. We've known that for a long time that it's optimal for GI health in everybody, but seems to have some specific benefits for folks with endometriosis or even with dysmenorrhea. So making sure that that's in place, and we're giving simple solutions for that, because what we have to be careful of, and I'm including you two in this as well, because I feel like you're a bit like me in this, is that we get really excited when we see somebody coming in who's been struggling with endometriosis, and we want to give them all the things at once that they can do to start helping themselves. And that can feel very overwhelming when you're on the receiving end of it. So again, coming back to, we have to regulate our own nervous system as well. And inside, we might get very excited, but on the outside, we have to remain calm. And we have to ask the person, well, where would you like to look at first? Do we want to talk about your constipation? Do we want to talk about your dyspareunia?
Yeah.
Do we want to talk about, just getting through the day? Do we want to talk about your period pain? Where would you like to start? And then we're because if we get overly excited, their nervous system, which is already quite sensitized, can take that as another threat or another source of stress. So we want to be really careful with that. So there's loads of things that we can do, loads of things in conjunction with the medical and the surgical. It's like all the ships are sailing together. But we have to recognize that we are dealing with people whose nervous system has been on quite a journey over the years before they got to come and see us. So we want to make sure that we're going easy, and we're providing a very safe, regulated environment for them. And it's a safe place for them to ask questions, or for them to say, you know what, I really don't want to do that. I'd rather do this instead. And that's okay too.
It sounds like what you're saying is, really it might be helpful for clinicians as well to just, you're looking at everything through that nervous system lens, if I can term it that. Like every single bit we're doing, we're either like contributing, like what we talk about is like we're dialing it up or dialing it down. And no matter what you're doing, we're impacting that nervous system.
Absolutely. I mean, because how can we not? We know that stress amplifies pain. We know that it amplifies distress. I mean, we've probably all been there. When you don't sleep well the night before, and just
like when it's 45 degrees.
Yeah. And a bit like that. I wouldn't know what that's like, but okay. I would say, or when you can't get to sleep and you're lying awake at 2 a.m. and you're thinking about every bad decision you ever made, and then you have to get up and you have to go to work the next day, and everything just seems very grim and grey, and it's hard to get motivated about anything. So sometimes just even starting with, okay, what are you going to eat for breakfast? What are you going to eat for lunch? What are you going to eat for dinner? What are we going to do to optimize your sleep hygiene? Because sometimes, again, simple things can move the needle with that as well. It doesn't have to be, okay, we've got to get you on sleeping medication. There's loads of things that we can do. What are you doing for movement? And we have to find a movement strategy that doesn't irritate your nervous system, that doesn't cause an overly inflammatory response. But we want to get you moving again, because we know that movement in itself is anti-inflammatory. And so the central premise is that endometriosis is a whole body inflammatory condition. What dials can we start to turn down? And we have many dials that we can affect. But what can we start to turn down so we're lowering that inflammatory load? So we might not be dealing with the actual endometriosis itself, but we're starting to turn the volume down. So we might be going from 100 decibels, and the goal might be to get back down to 50 or 60 decibels in a way that somebody can actually start to regain a little bit of quality of life again, but they're also regaining control. And, people will come and say, like, I know I overdid it at work. It was a really stressful situation. And I know I didn't eat well, and everything is just on fire at the moment. But I know why. I know why this is happening, and I know how to get back.
And I found in my role, if I can help someone get some autonomy back and get some control back and understand, then someone can get better.
Your vagus loves that. Your vagus loves
and
safety.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're listening to this and you're in the sea of pelvic pain and you're bouncing around between practitioners and you feel like you're not in control, that makes things worse. And once you start getting, that's why we're doing this podcast, because once you can start putting the pieces of this puzzle together, you get your power back and then you can start getting better.
And we were just talking off air, like even just that awareness, like, okay, so you may still be doing something, you know, you might still be pushing those buttons and dialing it up. But then when you have that reflection and go, oh, okay, now I can see that that's happened because of that, that can even start to dial down and dial down the button anyway.
What's worse than not knowing why you're feeling so awful, you know, and that in itself becomes another stressor. Yeah. So at least if you can say, you know what, I feel crummy, but at least I know why, how this happened. And more importantly, I know the road back, you know, and I have a toolbox for that.
Absolutely. Michelle Lyons, we're about to lose our connection here, but thank you so much. I'm so thrilled that we got you on the podcast. What a lovely conversation. Let's all love our vagus nerve a little bit more. And please, can we get you back and talk about abdominophrenic dyssynergia? Because that is something I think about in the night sometimes because it sounds massive now.
Until 2 a.m. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much.